Well, so much to talk about still with our guest editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater, who joins us in the studio. Good morning to you once again. Lots to talk about there in terms of defence. Just before we get to your thoughts, I just want to get our audience to know, well, if you're just tuning in, what we're asking you about. Obviously, always welcome to have your say on any topic at all that we are talking about. But in particular, after Russia bombed that children's hospital in Kyiv, should Britain be spending more on defence to make sure we can not only help defend Ukraine, but help defend our NATO allies and, oh, who knows, ourselves, after incredible warning from the head of the army that actually the amount of ammunition we have would make the hair on the back of your neck stand on end, and that we really are only equipped military-wise to fight a war for about a month. Well, given that Ukraine has been at war for 2.5 years since the invasion of Russia, that doesn't bode very well, does it? So I want to know, should Britain be spending more on defence? Do you think Keir Starmer will pledge to do that? And what should a Labour government spending priorities be? Because for a lot of Labour voters, spending will be on defence will be way down the list. But I want to hear from you. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Send a WhatsApp to the same number. You can text on 87222. You can get in touch on X at TalkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs one standard network rate message, of course. Tweets are free. And, of course, lots of you get in touch also on our YouTube page as well. We can check all of those for your messages and get you on air. Tom Slater, I mean, you know, should we spend more on defence?
Well, it seems like there's a pretty clear consensus here. I mean, if you look at the state of the military, you don't have to be someone who's, you know, bristling for conflict of anyone to realise that it's a strange situation to be in. It's a question of national independence as well, and being able to defend yourself and so on. That seems quite commonsensical. And it does seem like our elites across Europe and across the West have been sort of lulled into a slight kind of end of history sort of mindset, the idea that conflict was more or less a thing of the past. And even if we're lucky enough not to see anything kind of reach our shores anytime soon, the fact of the matter is, if we are committed to supporting Ukraine in terms of munitions and support and so on, then European countries really have to step up, have to be able to produce that. And not
expect the American public, the American taxpayers, to fund our defence. I've always thought that was perfectly reasonable. Even when we were on 2% of GDP, we're on 2.3 now. Again, you know, you're looking at 8% or something, you know, in wartime. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, a lot of that is going on things like veterans' pensions, which is very important, but I'm not sure it helps our war effort today.
No, absolutely, and it's one of those things where it's something which has been an open secret for such a long time. There's a reason that Donald Trump was able to make so much hay out of this.
Vladimir knows it too, and so does Xi Jinping.
Absolutely, so it's something that has always been a bit of an open secret. It's never really been properly addressed. Now it's kind of slowly beginning to be addressed, not just here, but it is interesting. It's very much in Europe. The closer you are to Russia, the more alive to this issue you are, and you see that reflected in the spend.
The Baltic states, Poland, they are absolutely, totally on top of this, aren't they? But again, Germany and France still not spending the 2% requirement, which we weren't for many years, that NATO requires. I always agree with Donald Trump. I've had so many criticisms of him when he said, I don't see why we should support NATO if you're not willing to pay for yourself. I thought people were outraged. I think I remember discussing it with you at the time. I thought it was a perfectly fair comment. You put up your side of the bargain. In terms of the pressure on NATO leaders meeting in Washington later today, it goes on till Thursday, this summit. Keir Starmer's going to be travelling after he's sworn in as an MP. We've got MPs that are facing sort of, you know, inductions, little tour of Parliament. I mean, look, there are a lot of MPs perhaps not expecting to have been there, including one Reform UK MP, Nigel Farage and Richard Haas never even met. There'll be many new Labour MPs, Lib Dem MPs who were not expected to be there. A lot of Tory MPs, by the way, clearing out their desks. They got till Thursday to clear out their offices and get everything out, and perhaps many of them were hoping they would hold on. So there's a lot of movement in Parliament. We're going to have a new Speaker is going to be agreed. Well, the new Speaker, very much likely to be Sir Lindsay Hoyle, one would expect that. And again, MPs being sworn in. I think Keir Starmer's going to be the third MP to be sworn in, simply so that he can get on a plane and head to Washington. But there are going to be so many competing priorities, aren't there, for an incoming government in terms of dealing with, I mean, all of the issues, tackling the NHS, dealing with the levelling up or whatever we're calling it this week, the planning, they're setting up this investment fund. The cost of net zero is absolutely sky high. The subsidies for that will be using up an awful lot of money. Defence, certainly for Labour, doesn't feel like a vote winner for them normally.
It doesn't. I think it's difficult to be a vote winner for anyone, really. Obviously, a more kind of conservative electorate is going to be nominally more concerned about that. But if you talk about kind of bread and butter issues, it obviously doesn't feature in that. So it's always very difficult to make these things feel as much of a priority as they might actually be. I think Keir Starmer has that extra incentive to appear serious on the world stage and so on, all the cliches you hear, because of his predecessor and also because of the tendency to always see Labour as a bit of a soft touch where these kinds of things are concerned, fairly or unfairly. So maybe that will push him towards it. But I think more than anything, the thing that would stop them getting to this target is their own inbuilt cautiousness fiscally than it is any ideological opposition
so far.
to it.
I mean, that brings us on something we touched on in the last hour, the speech from Rachel Reeves, the new Chancellor, yesterday at the Treasury, where she talked about, they'd looked at the books and her number two, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Gerald Jones, said, it's so much worse than we thought. We knew they were going to do this. We said they were going to do this. The figures that they will have seen are exactly the same figures they would have known about before they got into office.
Yeah, the idea there's some locked book of accounts that you only get to have a look at when you get
I mean, the office budget responsibility figures are independent and they are public. There's probably some, dodgy things coming down the line which perhaps they hadn't allowed for. But again, you'd think, given they've got Sue Gray as Chief of Staff, used to be very senior echelons of the Number 10 Civil Service, that she would have known where the bodies were buried anyway. They can't say it's a surprise. But as we were all saying, they're saying they're not going to raise the rates of income tax, national insurance, VAT, and corporation tax. But come on, everyone's expecting the taxes to go up. Even Tony Blair, former Labour Prime Minister, putting his tuppence worth in today, thinks there's about £50 billion worth of extra taxes that need to be raised.
Absolutely, and that has been the kind of open secret, I suppose. I mean, they are still trying to make the case that really what they're interested in is trying to create the conditions for growth, but that's a longer-term project than a question of a few years. How do governments do that? Well, it seems like the plan that they have, which is to say that we need to remove barriers to inward investment. So that could be talks in terms of reforming the planning rules. It could also be in terms of setting up this national wealth fund that they want to, so that there can be a pot of money which is put towards, but also is going to be matched with multiples more money from abroad and so on. It's kind of very much, the Labour plan seems very much aimed on how do we attract outside investment, and they're particularly convinced that what's going on in France at the moment will really kind of suck in a lot of the
come on over. All French millionaires and billionaires, feel free, come on over. I mean, the London property market's going to go crazy as they try and get their cash out with this new Popular Front.
But then you have this paradox, which is that they want all this investment because they want to plunge all this money into these big projects. But what are those projects? It tends to be renewable energy, which is a hiding to nothing, as we all know, and it's an expensive distraction from a lot of the deeper problems. Well,
it's not just as expensive, and it won't do anything to tackle climate change, such that climate change is possible to be tackled and a problem, which I do not accept either of those. But fundamentally, it's going to put such a drag on our ability to do anything else. You can't build anything because of the net zero laws. It's in law, unless, again, another failure of the Tories not to actually get rid of the mad laws that they brought in on this stuff. But also, you can't revitalise our industry in jobs and skilled labour, and indeed revitalise our defence industry in particular, unless, or house building, unless you can make cheap concrete and steel and things. And what does that need? Altogether now, fossil fuels.
Cheap and plentiful energy is the keystone of all of the growth.
There's the most wonderful graph the Institute of Economic Affairs put out, and you just look at the countries, basically countries that are rich and countries that have cheap, affordable energy, and I mean, it is really, really clear. There are no rich countries that don't have cheap, affordable energy.
No, absolutely, and this is something that the Labour Party used to understand. In decades past, they used to talk about.
The unions do.
They definitely do, and they've been an interesting and useful source of pushback against all of this mania. But, they would talk about energy that's so plentiful it's too cheap to meter. You're not going to hear them talk about that now, because they know that this project has to be borne on the backs of people's personal finances.
And also, don't forget those 500 million... No, it's 500 million, OK, 500,000 new jobs, green jobs.
No, exactly, yeah.
I mean, I can't wait to see all of those.
Exactly.
Good luck, everybody, with those jobs. I mean, again, when we're all having the army coming in to seize our gas boilers from us, because you ain't getting mine any other way. I'm telling you that right now, for starters. Yeah, I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating to watch. It really is, and also particularly to watch. I mean, look, dealing with the NHS, Wes Streeting. I mean, I think he's very impressive. I think he's a clever guy. I think he's a very good communicator. I think he's definitely one to watch. But again, at the end of the night, and of course there have been talks behind the scenes with the BMA. Of course there will have been. But, at the end of the night, they're not going to pay 35% to the junior doctors. But even if they did, and they solved the junior doctors' problem, strike problem, that doesn't solve the problems in the NHS. He says he's going to reform the NHS. Well, yeah, great. But, you know, good luck with the intransigence of the NHS, which is even worse than the intransigence of public servants in the civil service, who everyone now thinks are completely on side with Labour. Well, they will be until they're told stop working from home and get your sodding job done and actually achieve something. And I'm going to be fascinated to see how quickly Labour come up against the civil service.
And absolutely, I mean, this is something that Tony Blair used to talk about in terms of civil service kind of intransigence, that they have a bias not towards, he would say, not left or right, but just towards the status quo. So the civil service, even though they're quite clearly much more open to this Labour government, there was that report in the Mail on Sunday that that's to be encouraged to not clap too heavily. Posing for social media snaps with various cabinet ministers and so on, it's obvious that they recognise the Labour Party as the kind of party of the blob.
Yeah. They all voted Labour or Lib Dem, come on.
We know this, but at the same time, the issue is kind of system-wide as well. Yeah. The perverse incentives, the scleroticness of it, all that kind of thing is something which could easily trip up a Labour government, even with the best will in the world.
Well, again, and one of those will be migrants. I mean, we know, of course, that's going to be an issue. It doesn't just disappear. We've got rotten weather at the moment. We still had the first boat arriving of Channel migrants since the election of the new government. And now that problem is Sunak's problem. Now, is having a nice chat with Emmanuel Macron going to be the issue? Is appointing a new head to a new border task force, which had already existed anyway? Is this treating the smugglers as if they were terrorists in terms of not allowing them to come to Britain and seizing some of their assets? Is that going to make a difference? I don't think any of that is going to make a remote difference, because every time you do that to someone, another smuggler will turn up and do the money. It's so lucrative, this business. And, you know, and the Rwanda plan is over. What are they going to do with these people? Well, I mean, they've been talking about allowing them to work, basically for handing, you know, processing the asylum cases of some 100,000 in the backlog. How do you process those quickly? You give them a tick and you send them on their way. Well, I mean, how's that going to go down?
Especially not when we've already had situations in this country where you're not even seen crimes committed by people who have entered the country illegally, but in some cases, terrorist attacks. This is something which is going to flare up once again.
Rapes and murders.
Absolutely.
People who they'd be trying to report who've been able to stay here.
And this is not an anti-migrant refugee point or whatever. If you do not have a secure border, you do not know who is in the country. You do not know if, for instance, they've been floating around Europe getting denied asylum everywhere because they're an Islamist lunatic, and now they've just stumbled into this country because our borders are even more lax somehow. That's a problem that any serious government should take seriously. But I think on this issue, almost more than any other, they just don't really think about it. Like, even to go near and kind of touch the idea that you might need to get a grip on this problem offends something within them deeply, and they just kind of back away from it. But if they do carry on down the path that you've been describing, there will be that scandal or two or three or four that will make the public think we can't put up with this anymore.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I really do think that we've seen it happen before, but again, some of these high-profile cases in the last year, where people have been in this country, been free to roam around, and when they are known to be a danger to people. I just think it's utterly bizarre that they think they can just, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. It really won't. You know, when you're responsible for it, and you will have made those decisions, and you have to own it and be responsible for it. My thing is always, you know, the people who are signing off, this person is safe to stay, fine, you own it. We're going to name you. We're going to name you when, as a person who signed off on this, when this person commits a crime. How many do you think they'd sign off then? It's like the people who go, no, I think this prolific paedophile should absolutely be released from jail. He served his 7 years. Clearly he's safe. OK, have him babysit your kids. Yeah? Happy for him to babysit your kids? No? Well, then don't let him out of jail. It seems to me to be really, really simple, that people need to live with the consequences of the decisions they make. I think the biggest issue we've got in government over the last, forever, but particularly in recent years, is no one owns any of the decisions. And when they get things wrong, it's like, oh, sorry about that, we'll do better. And then they don't. Yeah. And I just think people need to live with the consequences of the decisions they make.